Are you struggling to connect APIs with N8N? By the end of this video, I'm going to give you all the tools that you need to connect any API like a pro. First, I'll break down the 4 most common types of API calls and what they're used for. Then, I'll show you guys how to use the HTTP node and why it's important. We'll also do a deep dive on how to understand API documentation. Then we'll jump into N8N and I'll show you guys how to make these API calls with real-world examples. Once you guys get comfortable making API calls, we'll cover the different types of authentication and how to set them up. So, what is an API call? Well, an API call is a way that 2 different applications can communicate with each other. Today, we're going to be focusing on REST API calls, which covers about 90% of all the applications out there. There are 4 main types of API calls that REST uses. Those are GET, POST, PUT, and delete. So imagine you have a CRM and you needed to add a contact into your CRM database. Well, that would be a POST request. Later on, you needed to get that contact's information. That would be a GET request. Then let's imagine you needed to change that information in some way. That would be your PUT request. And then if you wanted to delete the contact from your CRM, that would be your delete request. Now that you understand the most common types of API calls, let's jump straight into N8N. Now, I've got a new workflow here. I'm going to go ahead and add a new HTTP request node here. Now, as you can see, the first thing you see here is the method. Now, these are the different types of API calls, which I just mentioned previously. There are a few in here that I didn't talk about. And to be quite honest, they're very, very uncommon, and most of them are quite rare. You most likely will not encounter the head or the options or patch maybe. Patch is a lot like put, it's just update the information. But the head and the options, you probably will never encounter those, okay? Now below that, you have your URL. That would be the API endpoint that the application gives you. Then you can choose your different types of authentication. There are predefined credentials here. N8N has a lot of them already added. I'm not going to talk too much about those because N8N has already done most of the heavy lifting on the programming on that end. I'm mainly going to be talking about the generic credential types. And we have all these different types of authentication methods, right? And I'll be going over each of them a little bit later. Then we have our query parameters. Now, these are used to set search filters, something like if you're looking for a contact in a CRM, you're looking for somebody who you contacted within the last week, you would add that in your query parameters. Now, these are usually JSON fields. If you add them here, name and value, it actually just creates a JSON. So essentially, these 2 things are the same. Below that, you have your headers. Oftentimes, we'll use that for authentication, for API keys. Sometimes you'll use that for filter parameters as well. It really just depends on the API you're interacting with. And the same with the body. Sometimes the body, you use it for authentication. Sometimes you use it for filtering and things like that, or posting data. If you were to add a contact to a CRM, you would put that contact's information down here in the body. Using fields below and JSON are essentially the same thing, and I'll explain that a little bit here in a minute. Now, below that, you have your options. Now, these we won't be messing too much with. We could add a proxy, which would be really useful if you're using multiple accounts and stuff like that. You can add pagination, which is really good if you are getting hundreds of contacts from a database and they're only showing you 10 or 20 at a time, for example. The rest of this is not really relevant for most use cases. Then up here, you have this import curl button. Now, if you guys use Postman to test these API calls, you can actually just copy and paste the curl command. And some API documentation actually has curl commands available that you can copy paste. And if you import this, it'll autofill everything down here below, which can be very useful and very time saving. Now, looking beyond all the parameters, we also have these settings. Now, this is really important. One thing that I always put when it comes to API calls is retry on fail, and I always try at least 3, and then sometimes I'll wait about 5 seconds, so that's 5,000. And the reason why I would do that is because sometimes the internet cuts out, you never know. Or sometimes you hit a rate limit, or sometimes something funky gets messed up somewhere, right? So it's always good to retry a couple of times just to make sure the workflow doesn't break unintentionally and it wasn't just due to internet or data getting lost in the middle of nowhere. Other than that, always output data can sometimes be useful when you're troubleshooting different APIs. Today we won't be using that, and I don't think you guys will need it for the most part, but if you guys are having a lot of errors and you need to talk to ChatGPT, always output data might be able to help you. Now let's dive straight into some API documentation so that you guys can understand how to read these docs and use them in order to build the automations in N8N. So diving right in, I'm using Airtable's documentation because I feel like it's very clear and easy to understand some of these points. Now, Airtable is basically an Excel sheet where you can put records, get them, change them, delete them, and just interact it in any way you would normally interact with an Excel sheet. When you first see API documentation, you want to use it more like a dictionary. You don't really want to read everything. Most of the information is probably not going to apply to you. So you really want to just pick and choose what it is you're interacting with. Now we can take a look at the introduction, but honestly, I don't think we need to. I believe that the first thing we should look at is authentication. However, I'm saving that for a little bit later in the video. So instead, let's look at get record. So imagine we have the Excel sheet and we just want to get a row from the Excel sheet, right? This is how we would do it. Now we can see here that this is a get method. Okay, so if we go back to N8N and we go method, we have get right here. So those would be the same. And this is the URL you would use. Okay, so we would copy that URL and we would put that here. Now we have the base ID, which is the ID to the project in Airtable. We have the table ID, which is the ID for the table that we're interacting with. And we have the record ID, which is the ID of the row within the table that we're trying to get. Now, if we don't know the row, we could always just list the records here. And this one, we grab the base and table, it'll list all the rows, and you can see an example of what this should look like when this comes back. Now, this is a JSON, the format that I was talking about earlier. So if you go down to send body and you go JSON, using JSON right there, this is this format, okay? And this is the response that we'll get directly in our N8N workflow. So with all API documentation, they should give you a general example of how to use the request. Now this is a curl, right? So we can actually import the curl. We can just paste it right there and click import, and it will create it right here for us. Now we have to change our API token here. This already did authorization for us, which is beautiful. We have to put our table ID name and our base ID. But other than that, if we were to call this and all that information was correct, this would work. So all API documentation will tell you the type of call. So now let's check out a different type of request, okay? Well, let's go to update multiple records. Now this one is a patch or a put method. Now, patch and put methods are basically exactly the same. They almost do the same thing. It really just depends on which API you're interacting with. You're going to see put more often than patch because put is more common. And basically what we would have to do is we would have to send information like this, and then we would get a response confirming that the information was working. So let's copy this again as a curl command, and let's go straight over to import curl on N8N and see what that looks like. And as you can see now down here, we have this, right? Now this would be the information that we would be sending to the row on the Excel sheet to update the row. Now, of course, we have other types of methods too. We can create new records. Now that would be a post method, just like I mentioned previously. And we can delete records as well, which would be a delete record. As you can see, almost every single API call is one of the 4 types of API calls that I mentioned previously. If you're feeling stuck connecting all these different APIs and you just want a little bit of help, I'm offering a free 15-minute call to help you out with whatever you need. So if that's something you're interested in, please use the link down below. below. So now it's time to jump directly in N8N and start doing some API calls. Now for that, we're going to be using request.in. Now I'm not sure if I said that right, but I'll leave a link down in the description below. Now this is a public API that has no authentication that people can use to test out different integrations and functionalities, which I believe is perfect for showing you guys exactly how to do these API calls. All right, so now we have the documentation up. So we're going to start by doing a GET request. Now the base API URL is this link /API / like that. So I'm going to copy that. Then what I'm going to do is go to N8N. We're going to create a new HTTP request node so we can start from scratch. We're going to go method get. We're going to post that here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pick which ones we want. And I believe this first one is just fine. So we can actually just, if you click there, it actually does the API call for you. But we can actually just copy this, paste that in here, and test the step. And you can see that it does output the data. It looks like this in the schema. And this is the JSON file, okay? So you can see already that we're already doing API calls really, really easily. Now, outside of a GET request, we still have 3 other types of requests, right? So let's go ahead and create something. So we have to do /API/users, okay, with nothing else. We have to do a post method, and then we have to actually send a body here. Now, what does it say? It says we need to send a name and a job. So let's go ahead and copy this. We could put it here if we wanted to, or we could put it in a JSON. I'm going to go ahead and do both so I can show you how they both work. So let's put name here, and we're going to put John. Why not? And then we're going to add one more parameter, and we're going to go job, and we're going to go programmer. And let's go ahead and test that, see if it works. And it says, yeah, one item, John, programmer. We have an ID now, and when it was created, which is beautiful. Now, I'm going to show you how to do it in JSON form. Like I said, it's exactly the same, right? So we can go using JSON. We can actually go over here. We can copy this, paste it in right here below. And then again, we can go ahead and put John. And we can put here, instead of that, we can put sales. And we can click test step. And we can see now that we have John Sales. This is confirmation that he has been created. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to update. So we'll go over to put. And it's the same thing. It looks like it's the same request, actually. So we have to select a user. We'll go users/2. That would be the ID of the user. So for those of you guys, that's this ID right here. We're selecting the second user, and we're going to update their information. And then up here, we're going to be putting a put request. Then click test step, and it looks like it did update, and we have an updated at date. Okay, now we're going to do the last one where we actually delete a record. And all we have to do is call a delete request to the API URL. So let's go here. We can actually remove the body. We can go delete here. And then we're going to delete the user number 2, which again was the ID I showed you previously. Let's go test step. And you can see it did complete successfully. So that's beautiful. Now let's talk about authentication. Now there are 3 main types of authentication that you're most likely to come across. And the first one is called API key authentication. That's where the API you're trying to interact with gives you some sort of token or API key. And generally you would put that key either in the header, in the body, or in the link itself when you do the API calls. Now your second one is called basic authentication. Now this one I believe is the most uncommon, so you're not as likely to encounter this. This is where you'll provide a username and a password either in the header or in the body, or sometimes even in the link itself. And with that, sometimes it'll respond with a token that you'll use moving forward to do your API calls, and sometimes you just use the username and password moving forward. With this method, it is vital that you use HTTPS to make sure it's secured, because you don't want to be leaking leaking any usernames or passwords out there on the internet. This is one of the more insecure methods of interacting with APIs. So if security is a main issue there, try to avoid this. So the third most common API authentication method is OAuth. Now, this is by far the most common method. It's a little bit more complex and it's a lot more secure, and it's by far way more user-friendly for people. So if you've ever gone to a website and you've ever seen sign in or sign up with Google, that is OAuth. Now I'm going to show you guys how to use the API key authentication, and I believe Airtable is a really good app to use in order to show you that. So go ahead and go to airtable.com/create/tokens/new, link down in the description below. Go ahead and create a new token, name it whatever you want. I'm going to name it hi. We're going to add some scopes. Let's add read, write scopes. Let's just go ahead and add all of them. And we're going to add access to the YouTube base and click create token. We're going to copy this token. Feel free to copy it yourself, guys. And I'm going to save it for later. Now, really quickly, we're going to go over to the project in Airtable, and we're just going to add some test records here. All right, so now we added some test data to interact with. Now go to Airtable documentation, again, link down below, and go ahead and click on the workspace that we're going to be interacting with, and it generates API documentation for the Airtable that we're interacting with, which is absolutely amazing. Now let's go to list records, and let's just copy this curl command right here and make our lives really easy. We'll go back over. We'll add the HTTP node, and we'll import curl. We'll paste it in, click import, and it looks like everything is all set up except for we do need to add our secret API token, which I saved right here. Let me grab that. And we'll paste the token here, and let's just test it. And it seems like it authenticated perfectly. So this is how you guys will use your API key authentication. Now to show you guys how to use basic authentication, we're going back over to regress.in. Okay. Now I don't have an account with this, obviously, but this is enabled to show you guys how to use basic authentication, right? So we're actually going to grab this request API right here, copy that. We'll go back real quick. We'll go here. I'm going to delete it and add a new HTTP node again. We're going to go get, and then authentication, we're going to go generic credential type, and we're going to go basic auth. We're going to make a new credential, and we're going to put a username and a password, whatever we want. We'll put hi and random password. All right, click save. And then go ahead and test the step. And it did authenticate just fine. Now this API, like I said, is enabled to interact like a normal API, even though I don't have an account set up with it. Now to demonstrate how OAuth works, we're going to do Google Sheets. Okay, I believe it's the most straightforward way to explain this. So go to console.cloud.google.com. And what we're going to do up here is we're going to type in Sheets. We're going to enable Google Sheets API. Now, I have already done that. Once you click enable, you're going to be shown this screen right here, which is beautiful. Then we're going to go OAuth consent screen. Okay. Now, when you first create an OAuth consent screen, it's going to ask you for a name, an email, an authorized domain. Now, the domain needs to be the same domain that your N8N is on. So horizon.dev for me. And then save and continue. It's going to add some scopes. Here we can just add or remove them. I'm just going to add them all. Click update. Save and continue. And then summary looks good. After that, we're going to go over to credentials. Go to create credentials. We're going to go OAuth client ID. We're going to pick web application. Name it whatever you want. Test for YouTube. Beautiful. And we're going to add a authorized redirect URI. We're going to go over here to N8N, add the HTTP request node, go down to authentication, go generic credential type, OAuth version 2 API. We're going to create a new one. And we're going to grab this callback URL right here. Then we're going to paste it here and click create. Wonderful. Now we're going to grab the client ID. We're going to grab the client secret, which I believe is right here. Now, the Google documentation is really confusing. You'd think it'd be different because it's Google and they're a huge company, but it's actually really bad. So I went ahead and asked ChatGPT to help us out with a couple of things. So as you can see here, we were missing the authorization URL, the access token URL, and the scope right here. So I went to ChatGPT and I asked, where's the authorization URL and access token URL? And it gave me those. So let's copy those over. So authorization URL, scroll down, access token URL right here. And then we're going to go down and I asked it where the scopes are. And it gave me this URL right here. Copy that. We're going to paste that in. And then just click connect my account. Give it a minute. Pick the account that you use to create the API credentials. Sometimes they'll ask you permission, sometimes it won't if you already gave it. As you can see now, the account is properly connected. If you're ready to take your N8N skills to the next level, please make sure to check out my video on how to use N8N with webhooks. And before you guys go, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. You guys have a wonderful day.